Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. I was in love. She was my wife, and I thought she was my best friend. Debbie and I had been married for 6 years when I found out that it was all an illusion. We were living in Portland at the time. Debbie recently got a job as an internal auditor at the largest real estate firm in the city, and I was doing sales for a national machine tool manufacturer. Considering the range of my products, I rarely visited the city center. Most of my clients lived in the suburbs or remote areas of Western Oregon, but on this day I found myself in the city with an extra 2 hours left. I called Debbie to invite her to lunch and was disappointed when she told me that she needed to finish working on the spreadsheet before an important meeting in the afternoon. I didn't want to miss this opportunity, so I went to Jake's for a plate of their crayfish etouffee. I enjoyed the nutty brown sauce with rice, listening to the ladies at the table behind me and wondering how they do it. All 4 women seemed to be talking at the same time. This is not the first time I have observed this phenomenon, and it has always puzzled me. Men can't do that. I was sitting smiling to myself, trying to figure out how anyone could understand this gibberish, when something said by one of the ladies was imprinted in my head. I wasn't the only person intrigued by the lady's question, because the other 3 women at the table immediately fell silent. So Deborah Miller is doing dirty business with Simon Walker? This question immediately caught my attention because my wife's name is Deborah. She uses this name in her professional life. Only family and friends call her Debbie, and Miller is the name she's been carrying with me since we got married. By the way, I'm Mark Miller. One of the ladies asked, "Why do you know?" The first one answered, "I was sitting in Deborah's office when her husband called her. She refused his invitation, saying that she was working during her lunch break. 5 minutes later, Simon pokes his head into her office and asks if she's ready to leave. She nodded at Simon, then blushed and looked at me again, obviously embarrassed that I had heard her lie to her husband. My heart sank at her words, but my ears remained alert while the other ladies continued this stream of gossip. "It didn't take Simon long to sink his fangs into another married woman, did it? Deborah has only been working in the office for a month. And it's only been 2 months since Heidi Johnson quit. I heard her husband forced her to quit after he found out about her affair with Simon. Can you imagine a mother with 2 preschoolers falling for Simon's bait? What is his secret?" "You mean, besides those big blue eyes, Ryan Gosling's face?" All 4 women started laughing. I heard enough, so I paid the bill in cash and went to my car. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I was trying to figure out how to confirm my worst fears. If Debbie made love to that asshole, we're finished. So now, should I hire a private investigator to keep an eye on her? Or were there other means to do so? Damn it. I called Debbie's office and pretended to be a salesman. The receptionist kindly informed me that Miss Miller was not in the office and she would be back at 14 o'clock. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that the rumors are groundless. When Debbie returned home that evening, I tried my best to behave normally, although I almost lost my temper when she apologized for not being able to have lunch with me. She even had the audacity to kiss me on the cheek when she apologized. She asked if I would mind cooking dinner because she wanted to soak in the tub for a while before we sat down to dinner. She poured herself a glass of wine and headed to the main bathroom. It was probably her way of removing evidence. Coming home and taking a shower would be too obvious. Debbie was smart enough to use the bathtub as camouflage. How many more nights has she used this trick? I quickly made a salad and a tray of cheese and crackers and then headed to the bathroom. I undressed in the bedroom and went to the bathroom naked. Debbie almost jumped out of her skin when I walked into the bathroom and started climbing into her. "Mark, what are you doing? Are you trying to scare me to death?" "Well, if you remember, Deb, I live here too. I just thought we could use the hot water together." Debbie has a clue when she's lying or needs time to answer a question. She doesn't know she has it, and I've never told her about it. I've seen it from time to time. Just last week, I saw her show off when our good friend asked Debbie if she liked her new hairstyle. Debbie blinked twice and then told her friend that she was absolutely thrilled with her. Debbie showed before answering me. "I was just about to leave because I'm terribly hungry. Is dinner ready?" Before Debbie could wrap a towel around herself, I did my best to examine her. There were no distinctive bite marks, etc., and I couldn't get a good look at her shaved crotch without being conspicuous. When the water was leaking out of the tub, I thought about taking a water sample but had no idea how to do it. Catching Debbie turned out to be incredibly easy. That evening, I downloaded a self-published book on my Kindle called Amateur Detective, catching a cheating spouse. It only took me a couple of hours to read the basics, and the next morning I completed 2 tasks while Debbie was in the shower. First, I checked Debbie's calendar on her smartphone. Yesterday at noon, Debbie set aside 2 hours marked working until lunch. I noticed that the previous Thursday, the same 2 hours were allocated with the same mark. How clever of her. The second task was to download a tracking app to her phone. It was too easy, and after I thought about it, I checked my phone. There was a similar app on my phone. I quickly deleted the app from Debbie's phone. There was no point in rushing. I saved the app on my phone. It could come in handy later. You read stories about guys behaving normally, waiting for evidence of their wife's infidelity, but you can't believe how difficult it is until you try it yourself. For the next 5 days, I tried my best to be a loving husband. I checked her calendar every morning. Tuesday morning turned out to be a good day. There was a note between noon and 2. I'm working until lunch. After breakfast, I went to my office and did my best to get something done. On my way to work, I bought a mobile phone at Walmart. At 11 o'clock, I redirected my regular phone to a new mobile phone and left the regular phone on my desk. If Debbie had checked the tracking app she installed on my phone, it would have shown that I was 30 kilometers from her office. If she had called me, I could have answered on my cell phone. I drove downtown with 15 minutes to spare and settled into a Starbucks across from her office building. Exactly at noon, she came out of the front door with a man. Damn it, he really looked like Ryan Gosling. I left the Starbucks to follow them. It may seem trivial, but following the advice from the book, I put on a baseball cap, sunglasses, and in my right shoe I had a small stone to change my gait. None of this mattered, because the 2 lovebirds only paid attention to each other when they walked hand in hand 1 block to the lobby of the Vintage Hotel. I figured I had almost 2 hours, so I went across the street to the bank and started transferring some money, closing our shared credit card accounts and equity account. Debbie and I also had credit cards in each of our names. She wouldn't have found out about the closed accounts until it didn't matter. I also called my company's law firm and got recommendations from a divorce lawyer. I called her office and made an appointment for the next afternoon. With half an hour to spare, I returned to the hotel lobby. I was waiting in the lobby, trying to be inconspicuous and pretending to read the Wall Street Journal, but actually watching the elevator doors as the 2 of them descended. I got up. Debbie? Debbie stared at me with a shocked expression on her face. Mark, God, no. Simon was ready to play the hero because he came between Debbie and me. He started saying something about caution, holding out his hand like some damn traffic cop. I think Debbie forgot to tell him about the boxing classes I attend because he didn't seem ready when my fist went into his stomach just below the solar plexus. He fell down and actually peed in his pants. Debbie just stood there, still moving her lips like some damn fish. Before she could get a word out, I told her, I might as well leave the room for the night because I don't want you to come home tonight and probably ever again. Unfortunately, right after I got home that day, a patrol car pulled up. When I opened the door, I was handcuffed and taken to the Multnomah County Jail, where I was arrested for assault. Simon made the accusations. I ended up spending the night in jail before being released the next day. When I returned home, it became obvious that Debbie was in the house, because almost everything that was small and of any value, including the watch that my father left me after his death, had been seized. I checked the closet, and Debbie's clothes were gone too. Good riddance. I still had time to take a shower and make an appointment with my lawyer. Over the next 3 months, the following happened, in no particular order. The charges against me were dropped because I was lucky that the receptionist informed the police that Simon was moving towards me, and she saw him raise his hand. It seemed to her that he was ready to attack me. I think she was the kind of person who was happy to see any scumbag using a married woman get what they deserved. She wasn't really lying. She was just interpreting Simon's actions in my favor. I only communicated with Debbie through our lawyers. She tried the procedure. Can't we handle this? I firmly said no, and the divorce papers went through the system. When I refused to agree to a consultation, Debbie got angry and tried to get more than half of our common property, alimony, and so on. Luck was on my side because my lawyer argued that even though we lived in a state where there was no guilt, I shouldn't have suffered the consequences of her actions. The judge was shaken. My lawyer used a unique approach. He recalled that although Debbie had the opportunity to write her own vows, she agreed to traditional vows that included giving up on everyone else, so I expected fidelity. Secondly, We had testimony from Debbie's colleague about a conversation in Debbie's office when she refused my lunch invitation to have lunch with Simon. Thirdly, and you could have heard the pin drop when the case came to court, Debbie took my dad's watch while I was in jail. The judge tried her best to keep a neutral expression on her face when she heard this testimony, but she was obviously impressed by it. Even Debbie's lawyer cringed when the statement was read out in court. I got my divorce and my watch back. Debbie and I split everything we had accumulated during our marriage, and she didn't receive any alimony. Debbie asked for something else, and it was granted. She asked to meet with me before the final documents were signed, sealed, and delivered. What the hell? I agreed, if only out of curiosity. So we sat down in her lawyer's office, and she started talking nonsense about how much she loves me, how sorry she is that she fell into Simon's trap, and how she thinks that we are a great couple with a wonderful future. When I heard enough, I decided to bluff. Debbie, tell me about the others. Debbie blinked twice before answering. Mark, I've absolutely never been with any other man since we've been together. I shook my head. Goodbye, Debbie. This must have really pissed Debbie off, because 3 weeks later, I received the CD in the mail. It's hard to believe. I always thought Debbie was a pretty smart woman, but there was a record of Debbie and Simon's love on the CD. It all started with a fully clothed Debbie looking straight at the camera. Mark, this is for you. Eat your heart. The entire video lasted only 15 minutes. I opened a Tumblr account called Debbie Uses Simon and posted a video on the site. The site was getting a couple hundred views every day and a huge number of likes before I deleted it. I seriously considered sending links to the site to Debbie's parents, friends, and employer, but in the end decided to ease the tension in the war. I never told Debbie about the Tumblr account, but I sent her an email warning her that another similar video would end up on her father's computer screen. Debbie actually responded with an apology and an unconvincing explanation that she was still hurting from the way it all ended, and she was trying to make me jealous. She promised to stop. I'm a pretty tough guy. I'm sure most people who know me even find me a little cold. After the divorce, and even after watching the video, I didn't cry, didn't drink for a week, and didn't think about eating my gun. I was sad. After all, Debbie was my best friend for the 6 years we were married. Her betrayal has robbed me of all trust in other people. If you start to think that people are unreliable, you start to see it in your daily relationships with people. In my college psychology course, I'm pretty sure they called it a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, when the bartender or the sales consultant gave me change for a 10 instead of my 20, I thought they were trying to cheat me. Little things like that have turned me into a cynic. My job in the sales department didn't help either because it's an environment where a dog eats a dog. As for the women, I was doing the usual routine, chasing skirts and hanging out in bars, a kind of lonely existence, until I met Becky. A year after my divorce, I met Becky at a dinner party hosted by some clients. Becky was beautiful, with green eyes, blonde hair, a figure that belongs on the cover of the Victoria's Secret catalog, and most importantly, the personality of the woman you are proud to bring home to meet your family. Her smile and laughter could light up a room. They certainly illuminated me. I did everything I could at that dinner party to be the most charming and interesting man in the world. I could have been selling Mexican beer that night. Now, if only I could sell myself to this lady. When we were about to finish, I approached Becky and asked if I could invite her to dinner next weekend. How can I say no? She asked. You worked so hard tonight that I wanted to say yes. These efforts should be rewarded. Is it that obvious? Yes, but I think it's cute. I also asked our hostess what she thinks of you, and she said you have potential. So let's go out next Friday and find out. After 2 months of dating, we decided to become exclusive, but we didn't rush things. We lived separately, although we spent 4 or 5 evenings a week together. Each of my friends fell in love with her. The best part was that I was starting to fall in love with Becky and felt that she might be falling in love with me. A gentleman shouldn't kiss and tell, but without going into details, let me say that up to this point it was the best lovemaking of my life. There was nothing forbidden to her as long as it was limited to what 2 people could do to each other. I'm going to share one thing, and only because it embarrasses me more than it does her. If you've ever watched the Japanese movie Empire of the Senses, then you have some idea. I've never eaten eggs, but we experimented with cherries, chocolate, whipped cream, and a variety of desserts. We had fun in and out of bed. Yes, I started thinking that this could be my ticket to happiness, and then the bottom sank. My hunch that something might be wrong came one day when Becky and I took an early day off from our jobs and hung out for a beer. Becky's phone rang. She looked at the message and ignored the call. It wasn't like her. She usually answered the phone and told who she would call back later. After my stupidity with Debbie, I became more observant and suspicious. I wasn't going to play the role of the happy cuckold again. Later that evening, I had the opportunity to take her phone and look through her call list. She missed a call from a person listed in her contacts as Junior. Looking through the call log, I found several calls between the two of them. Then I looked at Becky's calendar and found that she had an appointment with Junior at 1 p.m. the next day. It's time to find your baseball cap, sunglasses, and shoe stone again. On Thursday afternoon, I was at the sandwich shop across the street from Becky's office building. She left the building alone and headed north on Broadway before entering the Marriott Hotel. As soon as I entered the lobby, Becky and a man approached the reception desk and spoke to the receptionist. I couldn't believe my eyes. How could this happen to me again? I almost threw up when I approached the two of them. "You're a traitor." Becky turned around and looked at me. I don't think her expression would have been different if I had shot her with a gun. The man she was with looked at me and asked, "Who is this?" Before Becky could answer his question, a second man with a Marriott badge came over. He stared at the three of us in confusion, but before anyone could say another word, Becky ran out of the lobby. Everything was happening too fast, but I read the badge with the name of the second man. Greg Houston, catering manager, and then looked back at the first man. The first man broke the silence. "I understand that you are Mark. I'm John Riley, the man Becky hired to organize your surprise 30th birthday party here at the Marriott. I think you really messed up just now. Becky didn't return my calls after that day. A week later, I woke up and found a box of things that I had left in her apartment on the porch in front of my townhouse. There was a note inside that simply read, 'I don't need anything that I left in your house. Give it all to charity.'" Becky. For the next 6 months, I became despondent. I ate, slept, and went to work. One afternoon, I decided to go out and attend Portland's annual craft beer festival on the waterfront. I was just lucky enough to run into Becky there. She was with a guy, and they were clearly a couple. After Becky introduced us to each other, she asked him if she could talk to me. To his credit, her boyfriend said yes. "Mark, I'm sorry that I didn't talk to you anymore, but at that time I was so offended and so angry. That evening I called my mother, and she told me that you were damaged goods and needed to run for your life. I took my mother's advice and left you alone. Becky, I wish I could be mad at you for the way it ended, but unfortunately I think your mother is right. Debbie's betrayal hurt me more than I could have imagined. I'm sorry I called you names in the hotel lobby. You didn't deserve it, and I was an ass. Mark, ask for help. You're too good a person to live the rest of your life alone because one person betrayed your trust. Find someone who can help you, whether it's a psychologist, a priest, or anyone else. I'm sorry that I wasn't the right person to restore your integrity. We almost got something done. Thanks for the advice. I think you're right, and I need to pull myself together. Thank your boyfriend for giving us the opportunity to speak out. You deserve a guy who trusts you enough to do this. Say hi to your mom for me and tell her what I said." She had raised a beautiful woman, and her instincts were right. We moved away from each other, and I saw the moisture in her eyes. I had to turn around quickly before she saw my tears. So where do you go when you need to rebuild and get your life back on track? Where should I have gone when my marriage fell apart? I took a 3-week vacation and went home to Chicago. It's time to play the prodigal son. Mom still lived in the house we grew up in the northern part of the city. I was the only one of her children who moved out of the area, so she wasn't alone. My older sister had 2 children, and my younger brother had 3. I often teased him that his wife was an ordinary child-making machine. 3 children before his 30th birthday. With 5 grandchildren by my side, my mother was busy, but I knew she missed my presence. Although I can't imagine why, since she always claimed that I was the cause of her gray hair. On the second day of my stay in the city, my mother invited my brother and sister and their families to a big feast. She made my favorite dish, her homemade lasagna, and my favorite dessert, her chocolate cheese pie. Like I said, it's like the prodigal son. I played a long-lost uncle and gave each of my nieces an expensive electronic gift, which most of them were too young to use. You could see their parents rolling their eyes at my stupidity, but I think they appreciated my feelings. After everyone left, my mom and I washed the dishes together and were able to chat. Mom wasn't the type to give out advice. It was always Dad's job, but Mom always knew what to do. Your buddy Hank Taylor still drops by from time to time. He's asking how you're doing. When was the last time you spoke? Not as often as you should, and before you say it, yes. It's probably my fault that we don't communicate more often. Call him. Hank has been my best friend since we met in kindergarten and before I left for college. We were inseparable. In the minor leagues, he was a pitcher and I was a catcher. For 6 years in football, he was a quarterback and I was his receiver. I quit baseball in my freshman year because I was a mediocre hitter at best, and the athletics coach noticed my pole vault and high jump abilities in physical education class. I quit football after my freshman year because my father was worried that I would get injured and lose my chances of getting a college athletics scholarship. In junior high school, I was one of the best pole vaulters in the country, and the University of Oregon was going to accept me to study. My father's decision to suspend me from football had a negative impact on Hank's life. Our football team just missed the junior high state championship. In many ways, our success was due to the Taylor-Miller combination. I was Hank's numbered 1 partner. His senior year was a failure. Most of the players had glass hands, and his stats weren't good enough to get a college football scholarship, his first love. He got a baseball scholarship to Southern Illinois and excelled on his own. Hank knew my father and his influence on my decision, and he never resented me for giving up football. I ended up going to university and was on my way to the Olympic Games when a freak accident ended my pole vault career. During the warm-up at the NCAA Finals, my pole broke in half. This happens once in a million. I fell at an awkward angle and fractured my knee so badly that it took 2 years of therapy to recover 90%. By that time, the Olympics were over and I had earned my bachelor's degree. I also had $250,000 in the bank after the pole manufacturer paid off. In case you're wondering, Debbie couldn't touch $250,000. With me in Oregon and Hank and Sue, we started to drift apart. I was one of his best men when he married Janice, and the last time I was at home was after Janice gave birth to their second son. It's been a little over 2 years since I last saw Hank, and if he was angry at my negligence, he didn't show it. 30 minutes after I called his house, we were sitting in his backyard drinking beer. First, I learned about what was going on in Hank's life, about his job, a firefighter from Chicago, his wife, Janice, and his 2 sons, Mark and Hank. Then it was my turn. Hank found out about my divorce from my mom, but she didn't share any details. He was less surprised by these events than I expected. He was surprised when I told him how my relationship with Becky ended and how I had trust issues. After Debbie's betrayal, it was hard for me to trust anyone. It just seems like everyone is on their own. Hank stared at me before answering. That's because you've been hanging out with the wrong people for the last 12 years. Let me tell you a story that you don't know. For the 3 years that you and Ginny dated in high school, I was in love with Ginny. Yes, I can see by the look on your face that you had no idea. That's how it should be. A friend never messes with a friend's lady no matter what. Do you remember that trip to my uncle's cabin in Door County? You had to work on Friday, just like the girl I was dating back then. Ginny and I went to the lodge on Friday morning to get everything ready. You and Stacy were going to come over on Friday night after work. Your car broke down and you didn't get there until late Saturday afternoon. So Ginny and I were going to spend the whole night alone because we got a call saying you were stuck in Milwaukee. We're drinking cheap wine, and Ginny's still wearing one of her bikinis after swimming in the lake, and to top it all off, the power went out in the cabin, so now we're sitting by candlelight. And you want to know what happened that night between Ginny and me? Nothing, because a friend never crosses that line. And if I hadn't been a friend and tried to hit on Ginny, do you know what would have happened? Nothing, because Ginny was one of those girls who would never cheat on her man. You went to Oregon and abandoned the people you could rely on to fulfill your Olympic dream. It's okay, but you shouldn't replace your friends with self-centered grabbers who only care about themselves. I'm sorry for you, Mark. It took me a few moments to realize what Hank had said. Then I thought of Ginny. Do you have any idea where Ginny is or what she's doing? I haven't seen her since the first Christmas, when I came home in my freshman year at Oregon. We practically broke up that week. Another long-distance romance has gone to waste. It didn't help. I promised that everything would be easy with Delta and the sorority girls. Ginny was here a couple of months ago. She is now a widow with a 5-year-old son. A widow? What happened? Her husband's last business trip to Afghanistan. He was wounded. She didn't go into details, but I understand that he received several important medals for bravery, and unfortunately posthumously. Ginny tries to hold on for the sake of their son, but it is clear that she can barely stand on her feet. She still lives in San Diego County, not far from the base, and his fellow officers are looking after her. She would probably be pleased to hear from you if you wanted to receive her email. Is she still attractive? Did anything happen between the two of you while she was in town? I looked over my shoulder when I asked about it to make sure Janice couldn't overhear our conversation, but the front door was closed. You weren't listening, Mark. What the hell happened to you? First of all, I would never cheat on Janice. Secondly, Ginny would never make love to a married man. It's just that we're both different. You need to get your head out of your ass. Only Hank Taylor could talk to me like that. That evening, I sent Ginny an email. Hank Taylor gave me your email address. I hope it wouldn't be inappropriate for me to contact you, but I'll be in the San Diego area this weekend, and I was wondering if I could invite you and your son to lunch or dinner on Friday or Saturday, just to catch up. With best wishes, Mark. Early on Tuesday morning, I received a pleasant, unexpected response to my email. How nice to hear from you after all these years. Lunch on Friday will suit me and my son, Kevin. I'll be waiting for you at noon if I don't get any other news from you. Your friend. Hank had been on duty since Tuesday, which meant he would be at the firehouse until I left town. But he invited me to explore the station and have dinner with his team. I accepted his offer, and later that day I sat at a table with the fire brigade. Blacks, whites, Latinos, men and women. It's still hard for me to explain the feelings I felt when I was sitting between two of Hank's colleagues. They were both ready to answer my questions. They are probably used to civilians being in awe of what they consider routine. What has become obvious is the need for the trust needed to carry out their tasks in extinguishing a fire. Each firefighter dared to enter the burning building only with the knowledge that his teammates would cover each other's backs and do their job. It was probably then that I began to realize that my life had started to go off the rails. Back in high school, I replaced baseball and football, two-team sports, with individual athletics competitions. Although the overall score of the athletics team depended on others, my contribution was based solely on my efforts. Even my chosen profession, sales, was similar to this one. Whether I made a sale or not depended almost entirely on my efforts. The only teamwork I could point to since I turned 15 has been my marriage to Debbie. Could my failed marriage have been partly due to my selfishness or the fact that I married a woman with egoistic traits similar to my own? On Thursday, I flew to San Diego, rented a car, and checked into the Coronado Hotel. On Friday, I drove north to Ginny's house, one of 4 apartments in a 4-story townhouse. I rang the doorbell and waited, trying to hide a bouquet of flowers from a curious neighbor. I almost dropped the flowers when the door opened. My God, Ginny was even more beautiful than when she was 19. She was wearing a bright blue sundress, and there was a little boy next to her leg. Mark, welcome. She put her hands behind my head and kissed me on the cheek. Is this for me? What is it? She asked, pointing to the flowers. It was a stupid question, but I think she was trying to get me to say something because I was still just standing there frozen. In response, I handed her a bouquet. Thanks, Mark. Come in, please, while I put this in the water. Mark, this is my son, Kevin. Kevin, this is Mr. Miller, an old friend I went to school with before I met your dad. Kevin held out his tiny hand and said, Hello, Mr. Miller. Finally, I found my voice and said, Hi, Kevin, shaking his hand. While Ginny was putting flowers in a vase, I looked around the apartment. The first thing that caught my attention was the folded flag in the center of the bookcase. There was a photo of a Marine on one side of the flag. 2 medals were attached to the frame, the Purple Heart and the Navy Cross. This is my dad. I looked at the photo on the other side of the flag, Ginny with her husband and little Kevin on the beach. Just at that moment, Ginny entered the room. Ginny, I'm sorry if something goes wrong, but this is a beautiful photo. You 3 look very much in love. You must miss him. No need to apologize. That's nice to hear, and yes, we were madly in love. I met him at Northwestern University. He was on the ROTC program when I studied journalism. My classmates wondered why I fell in love with a military man, and most of my classmates didn't have much respect for the military. But besides the fact that Chuck was a strong, confident man, he was someone you could trust. He had a heart of gold. That word is trust again. Ginny's eyes were slightly watering as she looked at the photo, so I broke the silence. Have you had lunch yet? Yes, we need to catch up. Come on, Kevin, Mr. Miller is taking us to the Red Robin. Kevin was very excited about this, and we jumped into Ginny's car instead of renting a car seat from me. During the trip, the conversation was more lively, and by the time we entered the restaurant, the 3 of us were laughing at some silly joke that Kevin had told us. The lunch was wonderful. although there have been so many changes in Ginny's life since we last spoke. Marriage, child, widow. She remained the same, kind, smart, funny, and charming. At one point, Ginny asked me why I was in San Diego. I was embarrassed, but decided to tell the truth. I told you about how my mom and Hank scolded me. So the truth is, I came here to apologize to you for the way I ended things back then. You deserved better. And honestly, listening to you tell me about your marriage to Chuck, I realized that you did a lot better. What are you going to do now? Are you going back to Portland? My flight is only on Sunday evening. I think I'll spend the next couple of days at the beach, run around a bit, and try to get my thoughts in order. I have a lot to think about. Kevin relieved boredom by coloring with crayons, which are distributed to children in a restaurant when two adults got carried away. But after 2 hours, we didn't have time, so we drove back to Ginny's. Mark, would you like to go to a barbecue at my friend's house tomorrow? What, and miss a day alone contemplating your navel? You're asking for a lot. Ginny laughed. Well, if you change your mind and decide to go to the barbecue with us, pick me up tomorrow at 11. Dress casual, in shorts and a polo shirt. Oh yeah, grab a beer. I told Ginny I'd see her later, kissed her on the cheek, and shook Kevin's hand. As I drove back to my hotel, all the reasons I loved Ginny during those 3 years in high school came flooding back to me. The next day, Ginny, Kevin, and I went on a picnic. Ginny was wearing white cropped shorts and what looked like a t-shirt with a bra. The shorts weren't too short for a family picnic, but they showed how toned she kept her athletic legs. She pulled her blonde hair back into a ponytail. Aviator sunglasses hid her brown eyes. After we parked the car, Ginny took my hand to introduce me to her friends. As we approached a small group of men, apparently all Marines, I felt their eyes studying me. I got the feeling that this picnic was partly a test of whether I was good enough to date Ginny. We were introduced to each other, and Ginny left me to make sure Kevin was with the other kids. At least that's the reason she gave me. I turned to the group. I hope this is not a cliché, but thank you for your service. Captain John Clayton was in charge of the group. Whether it's a cliché or not, we're always happy to hear it. My father served in Vietnam, and I see pleasure in his eyes whenever we are together. I'm in shape, and someone is thanking me. It is very different from what he experienced after returning from Vietnam. From that moment on, the conversation turned to more pleasant topics, including manly sports. The day passed quickly. I spent a little time with Ginny, a little time with the men, and even spent an hour in the kitchen with the ladies exchanging cooking tips. At the end of the day, I was invited to join the men at a local tavern after I drove Ginny home. Kevin was asleep in his car seat. Well, did I pass? I think so. But Doreen will probably call me after you leave for the tavern. Then I'll get another call tomorrow after the men report to their wives tonight. I hope you don't mind too much. They are a close-knit group that takes care of itself. I will always be a part of them because of Chuck. He and John Clayton were very close in Afghanistan. I held my breath and decided to ask the question that was spinning in my head. So the fact that I'm being tested means that you want to keep seeing me? Yes, Mark. We've both changed since high school, but there's still something in my heart for you. If you want to keep seeing me, I'd really like that. I'd like that too, Ginny. Let's start checking. We laughed, and I remembered how much I used to like the sound of her laughter. It'll probably be late when I leave the bar. Will we be able to see each other tomorrow if I pass the tests? Ginny laughed again. I usually go to Mass at 10. You can join me at Mass or come back later. She looked into my eyes. When was the last time you went to Mass, Mark? Besides funerals and weddings? It's been at least 10 years. I quietly moved away from the church when I moved to Oregon. I didn't stop believing, I just stopped going to church. We were driving up to her house. I carefully pulled Kevin out of the car seat and carried him to bed. I turned around and saw Ginny in the doorway, looking at us with a smile on her face. I went up to her, hugged her, and kissed her. She kissed me back. See you tomorrow. I'll be here at 9:30. Wish me luck. I entered the bar and was greeted by 5 men, including John Clayton. What will you have, Mark? I took a quick look around. Beer would be nice. Rodriguez, 1 beer for our friend. The bartender poured me a mug and the 6 of us took a table. John was obviously the leader here, which is why he started everything. Mark, we're not trying to offend you, but you have to understand that the 3 of us at this table, including Roddy the bartender and me, owe our lives to Chuck Turner. Has Ginny told you anything about this? No, I saw the Navy Cross, so I knew it must be something special. But I didn't want to interfere, so I kept quiet. Well done, showing respect. I'll tell you anyway. We were patrolling the mountains near Pakistan when we were ambushed by about 40 Taliban. We couldn't launch an airstrike because it would cause an avalanche. We couldn't retreat because they would have held the height and shot us down. Chuck ordered us to outflank them while he and Rodriguez stayed in position to draw them closer. It took us 3 hours over this rough terrain to advance to the rear of the Taliban. Chuck and Roddy occupied them for 3 hours. We managed to outflank them, and from a height we were able to destroy them. But by the time we got to Chuck and Roddy, both were injured. Chuck had 4 wounds and was still fighting. He died in my arms. Roddy was unconscious with head and leg wounds. Roddy has a prosthetic leg, which is why he works as a bartender and not on active duty. So that's why we're responsible for Ginny, at least until someone comes along and relieves us of responsibility. Someone worthy. I understand, John. Let me answer you this way. Ask Ginny if I've ever done anything disrespectful in the 3 years we've been together. My worst sin was letting her go, but I think it turned out better for her because she met Chuck and gave birth to their son. Then I didn't have the maturity to become a good husband or father. I have never touched a woman in anger, even when I caught my first wife with another man. I may not have what you have, the courage to blame men who shoot back at you, but I'm not a coward either. I wouldn't back down if it meant protecting the person I love from harm. I've recently realized that I'm a bit self-centered, but I'll work on it. So now that I know how things are, let me ask you all. I stopped to look around the table. Do I have your permission to continue seeing Ginny? People might think it was a little too much to ask permission to date an adult, but I saw it as a way to show respect for their obvious concern for a friend's widow. I wasn't pretending, but I'm a good salesman because I'm a pretty good judge of character. And it was the right question because the answer was a big smile from John and the others. Roddy, could you bring us something delicious? Let it be Knob Creek. Rodriguez brought 7 glasses, half filled with amber liquid. John raised his glass to toast. To Captain Chuck Turner. Rodriguez joined us and we all clinked glasses and drank. We stayed for a couple more hours, drinking slowly to avoid getting drunk. But we touched on a lot of topics. At one point, I was told why Ginny wasn't seeing anyone at the moment. John told me the whole story. Ginny and another Marine started a serious relationship last year. The problem was that Ginny couldn't be serious with another Marine, not after losing her first husband. And Tom has dreamed of becoming a Marine all his life. Tom told Ginny that he would resign from the Marines, and Ginny told Tom that if he did, she would never talk to him again. Tom transferred to Lejeune right after that, and Ginny hasn't been serious since, until she got your email. Doreen said she called that day, very excited about your visit. Don't tell me I said anything. I won't say anything, but thanks for sharing. The next day, my affair with Ginny began. I scored serious Alaska air frequent flyer miles flying between Portland and San Diego. I spent every other weekend with Ginny and Kevin. Hotel rooms were getting more expensive in addition to the cost of air tickets, and Ginny wasn't ready for us to end the relationship. John and Doreen were kind enough to put me in their guest room. At home, I tried my best to develop my interpersonal skills. Even my boss noticed the difference in my behavior. I joined the company's softball team. In San Diego, I played doubles tennis on the base courts. Ginny was my partner, and we were doing well with new partners. This was my 5th trip to San Diego. It's been 3 months since my first visit. I left the terminal and got into Ginny's car. When I looked back, Kevin's car seat was empty. Where's Kevin? Doreen and John are picking him up this weekend. I have a surprise for you. I hope you like it. Ginny replied, pulling away from the curb, exiting the airport and heading north. Ginny didn't tell me anything else about our destination, so we talked about other things. She told me that Kevin was disappointed that he wouldn't see me until Sunday. He really got attached to me. I could tell Ginny liked it just by the tone of her voice. As we drove, I noticed that Ginny was wearing the same blue sundress she wore at our first lunch, but this time she didn't have a bra under her dress. We drove up to La Jolla Beach and the tennis resort. She smiled broadly at me. I think it's time, isn't it? My answer to her question was a wide grin. As soon as she parked the car, I grabbed her and kissed her. You know I've fallen in love with you again, don't you, Mark? Well, thank God, because I've been hoping that you would do it since that very first weekend. I love you, Ginny. What a weekend. Ginny and I ordered room service and made love all Friday night. Funny, but the years that have passed have taught us both something, thank God. because what we did that night was nothing like the clumsiness of those two teenagers more than 12 years ago. Let me just say that by the time I passed out after 2 a.m., I had a huge smile on my face. We played tennis on Saturday afternoon and made love on Saturday evening. On Sunday morning, she surprised the hell out of me by taking us to a nude beach under the cliffs in Torrey Pines. Ginny stayed in her bikini bottoms but took off her top. I plucked up the courage and took off my swimming trunks for half an hour before worrying about sunburn and putting them back on. How did you know about this beach? Don't tell me you've done this before. Don't say anything, but Doreen and John come here from time to time. Doreen told me and made me swear to secrecy. Now you're sworn in too. We watched people for a while and even thought about joining a game of volleyball, but decided that maybe next time. I thought playing volleyball with a group of naked female classmates would be a great way to improve my interpersonal and team-building skills. It was early afternoon, and it was time to pick up Kevin, so we headed back up the cliffs to the Clayton house. John greeted me with a firm handshake and a bottle of beer, and Doreen hugged me and smiled broadly. Kevin hugged my legs. We had dinner with the Claytons. Kevin spent the whole evening with me. He seemed sad when Ginny dropped me off at the airport. On the way home, I made a decision. 2 weeks later, we returned to the Claytons for a drink on Friday night. When John and I were alone, I filled him in on the case. I'm going to ask Ginny to marry me, unless you have a reason why I shouldn't. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. She's madly in love with you, and I can't imagine a nicer guy or anything else that could make her happier. Does this mean that she will move to Portland? If she says yes and agrees, I'll try to get us back to the Chicago area. She misses her parents, brothers, and sisters. That's great, Mark. I know she talked about her family with Doreen. How are you going to handle this with Kevin? I'm going to invite him to lunch tomorrow and have a chat. Cross your fingers for me. You might be surprised by his reaction. This guy likes you. The next day, Ginny looked at me strangely when I told her that Kevin and I needed to run some errands together, but I got away with it, citing the fact that it was guys' social time. We went straight to the Red Robin and got a table. Over 2 milkshakes, I asked a question. Kevin, what would you say if I asked your mom to marry me? Would that be okay? I held my breath, waiting for his answer. That would be nice, Mr. Miller. My mom really likes you. What about you, Kevin? Do you like me enough to live with your mom and you? Yes. Will that make you my dad? Sort of. No one could replace your real father. What did you call him? I called him Dad. Then how about if your mom and I get married, you'll call me Dad? Will it be okay? Kevin had a sweet smile on his face, and he answered briefly, Of course. We headed back to his house. 2 are ready, 1 is left. I thought it would be difficult for Kevin to keep our conversation a secret. As soon as we walked through the door, I had a ring in my hand, and Kevin was carrying a bouquet of red roses. Ginny smiled when she saw the roses, then looked embarrassed when I fell to my knees. Ginny, will you marry me? Not very original, but right to the point. Ginny knelt down and hugged me. Yes, I love you, Mark. That's all I needed to hear. Kevin hugged us. Unfortunately, he forgot to drop the roses first, and the thorns scratched my neck. Fortunately, it was probably the worst thing that happened in the years of our life together. The epilogue, I won't delay it. My life with Ginny is blessed in many ways. We got married 3 months after I proposed. By then, I had found a great sales job at a startup north of Chicago, close enough to our families and old friends. Kevin now has a brother and a sister. They all call me Daddy because that's what Kevin calls me. Ginny still looks amazing after having 3 kids. We still play doubles tennis, and please don't tell anyone, but we've learned how to play volleyball, and we have a game on Black Beach whenever we visit the Claytons. Last May, our family met the Clayton clan in Washington, D.C. We did the usual tours, and on Memorial Day, we visited Chuck's grave in Arlington to pay our respects. 10 years have passed since Captain Turner was taken from his wife and son. It was a sad, gloomy, and proud day. I was glad that John and Doreen were there to help me comfort Kevin and Ginny. It took a whole day to get the smiles back, and for a few days after that, pain could be seen from time to time. But it was the right thing to do, to pay our respects to any person, be it a soldier, a policeman, or a firefighter, who voluntarily lives his life, knowing that one day he may be required to sacrifice everything for the sake of fulfilling his duties. We came back from our trip and it took a few weeks, but everything went back to normal. Even the flag of Captain Charles Turner, medals, and a photograph on the bookcase. It's nice for me that Ginny and Kevin let me into their lives after they had such a brave man as their husband and father. As for me, well, I'm glad I opened my eyes and ears to find out what trust really is. Even Hank stopped threatening to kick my ass, although he still gets mad at me every time I miss a shot during our softball league games. My excuse is that I was distracted by a beautiful blonde with 3 cheering children in the stands. My life is good. End.